Good afternoon. Today I'll be doing a video I've been looking forward to doing for 20 years. 18 years maybe? 18 or 20 years literally. So I've been wanting to do this video for a long time. And this is about ovulation. Boa constrictor ovulation to be exact. And what I've known for a long time is that ovulation is not a snapshot. It's not a picture. It's a movie. That's what I'm going to illustrate in this video. So the first video I ever shot of an ovulation was from a hypoboa that had been bred by the first motley I obtained. And she subsequently produced the first motley I ever produced. So that was about 20 years ago. It was 18 or 20 years ago. I don't remember the year exactly. But that video I shot with a big camera, and I had that video on file and in a computer, and I worked on trying to do it and do a voiceover with it, and I didn't try real hard to figure out how to do the voiceover. Anyways, I never got it done, and so I shot another video with a better camera in 2019. So the video you're going to see is a 4 hour and 15-minute video compressed into 42 minutes. Now, I don't know if I'm going to be able to babble about ovulation and such for 42 minutes or not. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. Sorry if I do go that long, but hopefully I'll impart some information that's helpful and show you what I learned, what I gleaned, and that ovulation is a movie, not a picture. And this will illustrate exactly what I'm talking about, seeing this at 6x speed. That's as fast as my video software editing or my editing software would do it. So the whole video is 6 times as fast as reality. So what you see on the video that transpires in 10 seconds is actually a full minute in real time. So everything is way faster than reality, but it still looks like slow motion because it is slow, so stinking slow when it actually happens. So I've really been looking forward to this. I hope you enjoy it. Comment if you learned something after this. Share it. I think this could be an important video for people to share, for other people to see how to identify ovulation, how to see it, and just to get the main realization that it's not a picture. It's not a moment in time. It's a movie. Something that transpires over hours, sometimes a full day. So, without any further ado, let's get into the voiceover on that video, and I will babble away. And I will say, at any rate, a lot. So get ready for that. Here we go. So we begin. This is a sharp albino motley, and she is ovulating. And yep, that is a little bit of urates, or are a little bit of urates on the left side. It's real life. So I shot this video. Uh-oh. She's moving. See that? Now that is at 6 times real time. That is going quite fast compared to reality. In reality, if you were sitting there looking at this, you might not even notice it. You could come by to check on your female. She could be in the middle of actually moving, and you might not even notice it. But when you speed it up 6 times, then you can see it. Now, she's not done in this particular cycle. There she is. She's inching forward. This is very, very slow. Showing at 6 times normal speed. Now, this you would see. Looks like she's rolling over in bed. You know, she's not quite comfortable, not quite in the exact position that she wants to be in, and she's just shifting just a little bit to increase her comfort. But what you notice is she is very, very tense. You might not notice, but I think you probably notice. And when your female is ovulating, she is really, really tensed up, as is this one. So I had seen this and noticed the movement. I call it locomotion. I should call it slocomotion. So locomotion, she is locomoting or moving forward very slowly, which is very interesting to watch, very interesting to see. And I'd seen that, and now she's done a sit here for quite a while without doing very much at all. And she's kind of relaxed now, but there is a spot there where she's a little bit bigger. There, she's going to move a little. There is a spot where she is larger, and depending on how many ovulations you've seen or how many ovulations you haven't seen, you may or may not be able to identify this positively as an ovulation. I'd seen a lot of them at this point. I've seen even more now. But there she goes again. So now that's going to look, if I come in and that's what I see and that's what I take a picture of, that's going to be closer to a football. It actually isn't a football yet, not what I would call a football ovulation. A football ovulation isn't necessary. And just because you don't see it doesn't mean that it didn't occur. I should say that as well, because sometimes it'll occur when you're not watching. So ovulation is different in reptiles than it is in humans. So a female human will ovulate, and that is she will send down an egg from an ovary into the fallopian tube, where it will await for the possible ovulation, or not ovulation, but fertilization by sperm, if the female happens to breed, for lack of a better term, or for using an appropriate term. And if she happens to have sperm present when that ova or egg is out there or in the fallopian tube, it may become fertilized. And then after becoming fertilized, it may be pushed into the uterus, where it will implant itself in the wall of the uterus. Now, all of those things are iffy. They are not guaranteed. But that's distinctly different from a boa constrictor ovulation. So in boa constrictors, all of the breeding is done well in advance of ovulation. Here she goes again. All of the breeding is done well in advance of the ovulation. So a male typically will begin to court a female weeks, at least, almost always at least 3 weeks before she will ovulate. Now that depends on where she is in her cycle. So a female boa will develop egg follicles, and the egg follicles start out as small as the egg is, which I actually don't know how small that is. It's probably the size of a pin or smaller in the female, and she'll have a bunch of them depending on the size that the female is, and they've got 2 oviducts, and she'll develop as many ova as her body tells her to develop. So it could be 8 total, and it can be potentially, it can be 80. I've heard of 2 litters of 80. The largest litter I've had is 64. And that was born on Super Bowl Sunday in 1992, incidentally. But it was a while ago, 33 years ago in a couple of months. So she'll be developing egg follicles, and oftentimes, probably typically, a female will begin to develop egg follicles without the presence of a male. So at the time of year when she's triggered by circumstances around the way you keep her, she will begin to develop larger ova. and she will feed them, typically reducing fat stores, which is converted to energy, which is put into the ova, and that looks like or resembles egg yolk. I don't know if it is technically exactly the same as an egg yolk or not that you would find in an egg. There she goes. She is locomoting forward. So right now we are 36, 37 minutes into filming of this ovulation. And she has moved forward, probably a little over a foot, maybe a foot and a half from the position she was in about 35 minutes. So it gives you an idea how slow she is moving forward. So she'll develop these egg follicles. And I have theorized that the male's courtship will continue that development. Sometimes he actually causes it, or it seems like he actually causes it. Now, these are things we don't really know, things that we think, or things that I think, having been the one to have kind of figured it out. The male will court the female. That courtship will stimulate the female to continue developing egg follicles. Camera change. I've got to move the camera ahead to keep up with her. So she will continue to develop egg follicles. The courtship by the male will encourage more of it. Feeding meals will encourage more of it. And it can take up to 6 months. So that's extreme, but it does happen. So 2 years ago, I had 4 litters from Peruvian red tail females, and they were the last boas in the place to ovulate. And they had males put in with them the same time as all of my Colombians. All of my Colombians had already ovulated that were going to ovulate. And it took 6 months from the time I put the males in, including male Peruvians, before I had the first Peruvian ovulate, which is interesting. At the same time, I had some Colombians ovulate within a month. And what's typical, an ovulation that's in a month or less usually does not result in a successful litter. That's usually slugs. Not always, but there's a really high percentage of those are slugs if it happens really quickly. So you want the male to court. The male will court the female. She'll develop egg follicles, and it will take quite a while before she will actually let the male copulate. So a male boa constrictor cannot copulate unless the female allows him to copulate. So it's not like a dog, or various mammals that can force their way in there. In a snake, in a boa constrictor or any snakes, the hemipenis is not. It's not a. What's the word? It's not a powerful device that can force its way in there, and the female's cloaca is not like it is in a mammal, an opening that's ready to receive it if the male attempts it. So there is no such thing as what you would consider rape, which you basically get with dogs and cats. A lot of times the female is not thrilled about it, but the male can still do it. So in boa constrictors, that's not possible. So the female has to open up her cloaca and expose the soft tissues in her cloaca. And then the male, and I have seen this, I have not been able to get videotape of it because they're very disturbed and won't do it, but you get, I don't even know what you call it, kissing, basically, where if you catch the male at the right angle, you can see his hemipenis coming out and kind of touching the female with the tip of it. So it comes out, touches her, and goes back in. 5 or 8 seconds later, comes out and touches her. And I'm sure that he is looking for a soft spot, hoping that she'll allow him to breed, because again, he can't force himself. So this is a lot of nitty gritty that I'm getting down to here, but this is how it happens. So I haven't actually seen them in the act of making that connection. Obviously, I've seen many boas that are connected and are copulating, but there's generally not much movement once that's occurred. So what I think happens is the male does this kissing until he finally hits soft tissue, which is the innermost parts of the female's cloaca, because she is allowing him to copulate, and then he will insert his hemipenis, which unfurls like a sock kind of unrolling. And once they're hooked up, they can be hooked up for half an hour. They can be hooked up for a day. It's a long process. And that's the time when the sperm are deposited by the male. So at that point, the female has not ovulated. If she's already ovulated, you've missed it, because the sperm have to be in the oviduct waiting for the ova to show up so that they can fertilize them. So that has to already have been done. This female's got a really nice swelling right here. So if you came across this and you didn't have a lot of experience breeding boas, you would probably identify this as ovulation, because this is a pretty obvious one at this particular moment. So then the male has to do his breeding. So typically the actual copulating is only going on for about a week before they ovulate. Now, I can't seem to make this clear to people, but just because the male's cloaca is up against the female's cloaca, it doesn't make them hooked up. It doesn't make it a lock, because it very rarely is, unless it's the last week or so. Look how she's softening up. Not quite as firm as she was a minute ago. Not sure what she's going to do next, but I guess we'll wait and see. Oh, here she goes. She's doing that little bit of a locomotion going forward again, squeezing those ova into the oviduct. So the actual copulation only occurs for about a week, maybe 10 days before the female will ovulate. It's during that time that if you offer a meal, it's very frequent that the female will not want to eat. She is intent on going forward with the plan, which is eventual ovulation and then carrying those babies to term, and then having a nice live birth, of course, which is what we're trying to do. So this female she is in the throes of it. We are, and what are we? An hour and a half. We're an hour and a half into this. It's only 14 minutes on the clock, but in real time, it was an hour and a half that I've been watching so far. Actually, I wasn't standing here watching it. I just set up the camera, and I'd come back every 10 minutes or so while I was doing something else, and adjusted the camera if I needed to. But so it's at that precise moment when she ovulates, after all the breeding has occurred. So the male may have bred her 5 times, he may have bred her twice, and the sperm are sitting there just waiting for the ova to show up so that they can fertilize the ova. This is how you get split litters. So if you have more than one male breed the female, you can actually have sperm in the oviduct waiting that came from more than one male. It probably happens a lot in the wild. So it's probably a lot more frequent that more than one male would find that female in the jungle and copulate with her. Sometimes it might be a male that's followed her around for 3 months, doing all the work. And then some other male, maybe he's a little bit bigger, throws the little guy off, and he takes advantage of it, and he actually gets to copulate, without having done all the work. Who knows? We don't know about these things that happen in the wild. We know about what we do in captivity. So sometimes some people use one male to get the female going and stick another male in, and then they sell the babies as het for whatever the second male is, despite the fact that the other male may have bred as well. So there are a lot of unscrupulous breeders that have done that, unfortunately. Many people have, unfortunately, purchased animals that were supposed to be het for one thing or another and were not because of that. So I would advise against using multiple males unless the result will show you exactly who sired the babies. So, and you can't guess at it. You can't guess at it if you're going to be scrupulous. So now here's something you can do. You don't have to shoot a movie to identify ovulation. And the ovulation is not a snapshot. So sometimes you can take a picture and it's very obvious it's ovulating, obvious to anyone. But as often as that, it's not going to be particularly obvious. Here she goes. She's locomoting again. Sometimes the ovulation is more obvious than it is at other times. Time for an adjustment. You see a flash every once in a while. And that little flash, those are gnats. So you got these little gnats that they eat anything that's that can rot, basically. So if you have a rodent around that didn't get eaten, they will eat that. They'll lay eggs in it, and you end up with maggots. They'll lay eggs in poop, and you can end up with maggots and poop. So I have been unable to eradicate the gnats, but the gnats find their way right in front of the camera. The light is on this. This is done with a cell phone. The light is on the cell phone, so it's attracting the gnats, and sometimes they go right in front of the lens, which is unfortunate. So she is forcing these ova into the oviduct. So she's forcing them forward and backward. The oviduct kind of goes up toward about the center point of the body. The ovaries will swell and distend quite a bit. And this often is mistaken by people to be an ovulation, even though it's what I would call a pre-ovulation or pre-ovulation swelling. So I always mark it down as ovulation, and I write down the date, and then I just continue to watch them. So over time, if it is an ovulation, they'll go opaque. And that'll be a telltale sign that what I saw that I thought was ovulation, especially if that shedding occurs 16 to 20 days after that. That's kind of typical. Now, if you don't get a shed until 50 days after that, you probably misread the ovulation. That was probably a pre-ovulation swelling, and there probably was another incident about 30 days after that. You know, assuming the shed was about 50 days later, it was probably about 30 days, 35 days after what you thought was ovulation that the actual ovulation occurred, because the post-ovulation shed is pretty stinking reliable. Now, it's not guaranteed. I know your boa didn't read the book. I have boas that hadn't read the book either. But these are things that we cannot know with 100% certainty. So you have to make an educated guess. The longer you've been doing it, the more ovulations you've seen, the more success you've had, the more likely you are to be able to make an educated guess that's accurate as to whether or not you're actually getting an ovulation. But I still always wait for that shedding to just be my positive identifier or indicator to me that an ovulation did occur. So I've seen a female ovulate, see her ovulating, and then come back an hour later and she's obviously not ovulating anymore. So that would mean I just caught the tail end of it. When did it start? I don't know. I have no way to know, because even if I would have checked her 4 hours before that, just because I didn't notice if she was that she was ovulating doesn't mean she wasn't. So ovulation, I think, usually takes at least about a half a day, even though I can't prove that. So I think it's about a half a day. That's my gut feel. I have had a female ovulate successfully, take 24 hours to ovulate, or even up to 2 days, and still produce a good, viable litter eventually. I do become a little bit concerned when it goes past a day, because that's pretty unusual. I've had probably 6 females that went past a day. And I'd probably gotten good litters from 2 of those females. I'm just guessing at the numbers. And then maybe 4 of those times, the female didn't stop ovulating. So I had one that ovulated for about a week and died, which is not what you want. So there was something wrong. My theory on that is that the oviduct was folded over on itself. So the oviduct went up toward the front of the body, and then for some reason kind of came back beside itself, came back toward the vent again, and then maybe turned and went forward again, or maybe not. But the point is that there was a point where the ova couldn't be pushed past one particular point because of a fold in the oviduct, and that can be fatal. So I had like 4 females that died after taking over a day to ovulate, and eventually they did ovulate, but I've had them do that and take a long time to ovulate, and the stress of not being able to push those ova killed the female, which is unfortunate. Not what we're going for. So she seems pretty relaxed here. You know, if you came upon that, I spoke too soon. So she was pretty relaxed and not really very tight looking. So it kind of ebbs and flows. So here's a little trick that I learned. So if you look at the side of this female, you see side medallions, right? They're pretty obvious. Or sometimes there's saddles or saddle points that come down. What I've done in the past, you can take a picture of where she is. This is how you can identify it, if it's ovulation or not. Aside from taking a picture and trying to ask me if it's ovulation or not, because I'm not going to say it is, because I don't know. But you can know. So if you mark a point, you either take a picture and come back in 10 or 20 minutes and then take another picture and see if she's locomoted forward. So if you see a large swelling or a lot of tenseness and you think she might be ovulating, take a picture and come back in 20 minutes, take another picture. If she's moved forward an inch, that's a good sign. And then come back in 20 more minutes. And if she's moved forward 3 inches and she continues to look tense, that's an excellent sign. Take another picture in 20 more minutes and check again. Another thing you can do is, and this is what I did before I did the picture. I don't even do it anymore, actually. But if I wanted to identify it, if you see a side medallion or a saddle point, and you just set a pencil on the substrate right below where that saddle is. So you're kind of marking where that is. I mean, you don't touch the snake. You just set a pencil there so it's even with that saddle point, or that side medallion. And then just come back in 10 minutes and see if she's locomoted forward at all. Come back in 10 minutes or 20 minutes and see if she is locomoted forward a little. Come back in 10 minutes or 20 minutes and see if she's locomoted forward a little. I know it takes a little effort, but there's no reason why anyone cannot identify ovulation in their boas using this method. It's very, very reliable. A lot more reliable than posting a picture online and having 50 people look at it, half of whom have never even bred a boa, and the other half who've, seen 2 or 3 ovulations, and asking them, is this an ovulation? Well, you can identify with certainty that it's an ovulation by marking where the female is. If she seems really tense and or there's a swelling, and then just checking back on her multiple times, that will tell you if it's an ovulation. Otherwise, opinions are whatever. Everybody's got one. And their opinion doesn't matter. So what you can identify, what you can observe yourself, is far, far more important and far more valuable to you. So just watch that, and that's how you can tell if your female is ovulating or not. So let's see, how long is she going to sit here? There's going to be a little bit more movement. That gnat is having a good time, huh? Flying around. So this female, she did produce babies, and I bred her to a it was either a labyrinth or a hypolabyrinth. So I made some labbies head sharp, and we've made labby sharps since then. So it was a fun litter. I think she had in the low 20s. This is a big female. She's about 7 foot and obviously pretty robust, and about 10 years old at this time, but only had about 22 babies, which is a relatively small litter compared to what you might expect for a big female. And I've had females that were 1/3 the weight of this particular female who have had larger litters or just as large. So I prefer breeding the smaller females that have some pretty good age on them. So one thing I didn't mention earlier is that female boas do not have a uterus. So a female boa has 2 oviducts. That's as far as the ova go. So the ova go into the oviducts where there hopefully is sperm awaiting that can fertilize those ova. And that is where they stay for the duration of the gestation period, which in boa constrictors is about 123 days, plus or minus about 5 days, roughly. That can be influenced by the locale that the animal is. So Hog Island boas always seem to go about 10 days less than that. Probably many of your smaller Central Americans go a shorter period of time as well. And then your true red tails may go 10 or 15 days beyond that. I don't know why that is, but it does seem like it does seem like beyond quality of the animal. Here she is. She's pumping away again, squeezing those ova into the oviduct, where hopefully they'll be fertilized. So it could be influenced by the temperature that you allow the female to be gestating those babies at. So this is really important. I think it's vitally important to provide a relatively large hotspot and not a very small, really, really high hotspot. So female isn't going to sit on a spot if it's 100 degrees, not for very long. She's going to have to move frequently. And sometimes people make the mistake of using just a narrow strip of flex watt for a gestating female, and that's kind of an unnatural position, because a natural position for a gravid female to sit in is coiled up. So you want to provide a larger basking spot. My own cages that I've built, which I've designed myself and have been building for a long time, the hot spot is about 1/3 of the size of the cage. So on a 4 foot by 2 foot cage, it's about 18 inches and then goes fully front to back. So it's out on one side or the other. And the female will coil up on that spot. So if your female, when she's coiled up on that spot, if she's moving on and off of that spot a lot, or with some degree of frequency, that tells you she's moderating or modulating her own temperature. She is thermal regulating. So she's keeping her body temperature at the perfect temperature, because she knows it and you don't. I don't know the perfect temperature. I suspect Well, I do know that female boas like to maintain their temperature about 89 degrees during the gestation period. It's especially true late afternoon. They like to make sure they're warmed up a little bit for the night, which in nature is always going to cool off a little bit. Now, that's not necessarily the case in captivity, but that doesn't remove their instinctive behaviors that they would go through to make sure that they had a little bit of extra warmth going into the coming cooler night, because they don't know instinctively that it's not going to be cooler, even though it never is cooler at night if you don't do a nighttime drop, which I don't. Haven't for years. She's really tight in this particular spot. This would be very obvious that she's ovulating, by the way. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't so obvious. But yeah, like I said, if you want to mark your spot or take some pictures, you can know with certainty. You don't have to post a picture again and ask every boa guy on the planet if this is ovulation. Many of you have sent me pictures, and I won't tell you if it's ovulation or not because I don't know. I can't tell. And then I've always explained, you can check it in 10 minutes, check it in 20 minutes, check it in 20 minutes, again and again, and then you can tell. You don't need me. And but sometimes the picture is pretty sneaking obvious, but you can always tell with certainty. So the oviduct is the end place for those ova. They stay there for the duration. The length of the gestation period is probably also influenced to some degree based upon the temperature you allow the female to gestate at. So I have heard of people that tell me that they like to make sure she stays warm enough that she's definitely never going to be too cool. So some breeders don't want them on the heat or the heat source very often or very much at all. They run that temperature, the ambient temperature in the cage, which usually requires warming up the room. They warm it up to a point where the female rarely sits on the heat. And guess what? That's not the wrong way to do it. That's not the right way to do it. That's just a way to do it. Because there are a million ways to do any of these things. By the same token, I know some breeders that want to keep the female on the heat 24/7. And that can work. That's not right or wrong, but that does come with some risk. So Rob Tudehope actually is the one that figured out, he's from Iowa, the state with no trees. At any rate, he is the one that first recommended to me that I buy a Raytec temperature gun. This is more than 30 years ago. And he noted that gravid females like to keep themselves at about 89 degrees, which is absolutely true. So if you maintain a really warm room and then a relatively warm hot spot and they don't want to sit on the heat very much, you may actually tempt them at a higher temperature than that, which isn't bad or necessarily beneficial. But if your female is sitting on heat all the time and never gets off the heat or rarely gets off the heat, you need to temper, because her temp may only be 87 degrees. And if it's 87 degrees, that is suboptimal. And you are increasing the likelihood of having slugs or having babies delivered prematurely that are not fully formed, that may have a large belly still full of yolk. They're in a precarious position in captivity, because you cannot duplicate what they will find in the wild. So you have to do your best to come as close as possible to that, but you cannot duplicate it 100%. So if your female is not, or is sitting on the heat constantly, and she isn't able to maintain a warm enough temperature, and her body temperature is only 87, and by the way, temp guns are notoriously inaccurate. So you can't go by the temp gun either. Here's a little secret for you. I don't have any thermometers in any of my cages. Not one. Now, the only thing that I have in a cage that's close to a quote-unquote thermometer is a temperature probe on the heater, which is monitoring the temperature of the heater, not the temperature of the cage. So that you might have to think about that to wrap your head around that. But the probe is not measuring the temperature of the cage the way I set them up. I monitor the temperature of the heater. I keep my room at about 78 degrees. So I know I'm close to, being a healthy temperature. And then I've got my hotspot set during breeding at about 90. And the size that my heat pads are, it doesn't make the ambient temperature of the cage much over the 78, usually 80 to 82, depending on the proximity of the cage to the floor. So the higher it is, the warmer it's going to run. It doesn't have to be an exact, within an exact temperature degree. It just needs to be in the ballpark. You need to be able to see your female in particular thermal regulating, sometimes getting on the heat, sometimes not on the heat. When she's gravid, if she's on the heat constantly, she may not be warm enough. That is the danger that I wanted to get to. So if your female is sitting on the heat all the time, there is a possibility that she will give birth early. It's not guaranteed, because sometimes, in some instances, that female will hold the babies an unnaturally long period of time. So they may hold them 2 weeks longer than the due date. I mean, the longest I've had one go, I think, was on a breeding where I had a very reliable ovulation, and then a subsequent post-ovulation shed, within 16 to 20 days. The longest total gestation period I recorded is 146 days. And I got a good litter. I wasn't aware of any kind of an issue, the cage being too cool or whatever. She just gave birth later than I wrote she should, because I'm the one who figured it out, how long the gestation period is. And maybe she just did it to insult me, just to show me that I don't know everything, which I don't. So if you don't keep the female quite warm enough, and she's only 87 degrees, if she gives birth at 105 days after the post-ovulation shed, and if she shed 16 days after she ovulated, that's only 121 days, which, if the female was kept plenty warm, is probably going to be fine. But if it's that female that's been on the heat the whole time, and her body temperature has only been 87, even though she probably instinctively wanted to be a little bit warmer than that, now you are running the risk that that female is going to have babies that are a little bit early. So they can come out early and have a huge belly full of yolk. They can come out early and die from respiratory failure because they're just not mature. I mean, it's fraught with problems that sometimes can be overcome, sometimes can't. So it's very important that you pay attention to the animal, not to a number. So you want the female to get on the heat and off of the heat intermittently through the day, typically favoring the heat more so in the late afternoon and early evening, which is kind of an instinctive reaction, which I described already, because that tells you, by that behavior, that tells you, the keeper, that you're providing the right temperature, that she is able to thermoregulate back and forth and keep her temperature right. I have females that I've bred, 5-6 times, and I've never used a temp gun on them. They don't have a thermometer in the cage, because I go by the behavior. So that's the most important thing. is the behavior. So I hope you enjoyed this. This figuring stuff out is who I am. I mean, that's what I do. I enjoy doing it. I listen to what other people say, and oftentimes somebody will say something, hey, that's interesting. I'm going to investigate and see if that's right. Like Rob Tudahope with the temp gun. I mean, that was early on. I didn't know much, very little. That was probably 1990 or so, and I only had, maybe 6 litters. And he told me to get the temp gun, and I got the temp gun, and it was amazing to use it. I had a lot of fun playing around with it. But that's kind of an example of where someone suggested something to me, and I used that to drill down on it and figure out, how does this apply to me keeping boas and how it works exactly. And so I wrote about it for the first time that anybody read about it publicly on King Snake, probably. But Rob Tudahope's the one that came up with that idea, and I did give him credit for it at the time. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed the information. If you did, share it. Share it with your friends. Share it on your Facebook, on your Instagram. I'd appreciate it. And the more people that see my content, the more likely I am to continue to do it. So have fun.